Dobar dan, pratite još jedno izdanje emisije Znam, da znaš. Moje ime je Bojana Dabovića, moja današnja sagovornica, ambasadorka Kraljevine Švedske, Annika Ben David. Your Excellency, thank you very much for accepting this interview and for hosting us here.
My pleasure, you're welcome.
Prosto zbog vas koji nas danas gledate, naglasit ću da se ova emisija snima 2 dana ranije zbog svih dešavanja koje se u Crnoj Gori prosto mijenjaju iz sata u sat. So, Your Excellency, we know that Sweden's priority during the presidency of EU are ecology, security and free Europe. But how high on the agenda is the enlargement process?
Indeed, security for EU citizens, the green transition, the fight against corruption and organized crime, but also safeguarding the EU fundamentals, that is democracy, the rule of law and human rights, are Sweden's priorities for our EU presidency that is underway. What frames our entire presidency is, of course, Russia's war against Ukraine. That is the lens with which, or through which, we approach, analyze and see everything that we do and where we will go next. On the Western Balkans, I think that the EU summit in Tirana, where our Prime Minister was present, of course, and his statements after that, is a reaffirmation of the EU's commitment to enlargement. And I also believe that geopolitical developments over the past year, with the breach of the European security order through Russia's war against Ukraine, has shown us that enlargement is important and that there is a desire from the European Union to make this entirely clear. We have seen this in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have seen it with other countries and with, of course, Ukraine, not least. So there is a momentum to move forward.
Does your country have a plan to help stabilize the crisis which now exists in Western Balkans, including Montenegro?
As I said, now is the time to move ahead. The entire European Union senses this urgency of the enlargement going forward. But, of course, as always, it's up to the candidate countries themselves to advance, to meet the criteria of the EU acquis and the steps that need to be taken to come closer to a membership.
So, do you have any specific advice to these countries? What should they do so they can meet the criteria?
The benchmarks are there. The new methodology puts the onus on the fundamentals, respect for the rule of law, democracy, human rights. So there is a clear path. Mm-hmm. And this is the roadmap and the benchmarks that candidate countries need to pass through. But of course, with the support that the EU is offering, we want the Western Balkan countries to become the member of the family where they already belong.
Mm-hmm. So Montenegro is an ecological country and a member of NATO Pact. Was until recently treated as a leader in the European integration process in Western Balkans, I mean. So how do you assess the current situation in Montenegro like today?
I think that it's very regrettable that the political situation in Montenegro has been unstable for quite some time because it risks derailing or slowing down at least Montenegro's EU path. Montenegro was a front runner on the Western Balkans and among the countries. And we quickly want to see Montenegro come back on track and to pursue its EU accession. This is the choice, the strategic choice for the future by an overwhelming majority of Montenegrin citizens. And I think also that the EU can offer the best agenda for the future for the people living in Montenegro. But the crisis is to a large degree self-inflicted. What is needed now is to come back on track, and the most acute urgent and necessary step is to have the Constitutional Court being full and fully functional, operationalized. Again, operational, sorry.
Mm-hmm. So, as you mentioned now, the Constitutional Court, and at this moment when we are talking, the Parliament of Montenegro is debating and deciding on the completion of the Constitutional Court. That's like the key institution for unblocking all processes. What do you expect? And what is the importance of unblocking that institution?
What I expect is Montenegro to get back on track and to overcome this hurdle that has taken too much time. It is absolutely paramount that Montenegro has a fully manned and fully operational constitutional court. That's the backbone of any democratic country. So that is the priority number one. I fear that Montenegro's EU accession could be severely hampered or even jeopardized if that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. So some ambassadors whose addresses are in Podgorica and they are living in Montenegro for a while now, sometimes they find it difficult to understand how Montenegro has turned from the leader in Europe integration into a kind of Russian governorate. How aggravating is the fact that you cover Montenegro on a non-residential basis from Montenegro? I mean, do you know enough about Montenegro? Can you know from Belgrade enough about its culture, history, and political situation?
I'm not aware of any EU colleagues who have made statements to that effect. I represent a small country, Sweden. We naturally have to, unfortunately, limit our presence. We cannot be everywhere in the world, which is the case for many, many countries. I have excellent cooperation with my EU colleagues and with a very, very helpful EU delegation. We have an excellent cooperation with a high degree of trust and consensus in how we approach things. Of course, we would like to be present diplomatically in every country, but that is sadly not possible.
Understandable. So, from our Western addresses, we get the warnings from time to time that extraordinary parliamentary elections must be held so the crisis can be solved in the country. However, the ruling majority is obviously in Montenegro is not interested in that. What can Europe do to motivate that majority to hold extraordinary parliamentary elections?
I think it's important to remind ourselves that the EU is not a stakeholder in Montenegro. Montenegro, its elected leaders and its people own their own destiny, and they need to take matters at hand. The European Union is there to help Montenegro come closer to an EU membership. But when it comes to the next steps for Montenegro, that is something that has to be decided by Montenegro itself.
Will there be any consequences in case that parliamentary elections wouldn't be held in some logical time in the future?
The EU comments on the situation at hand, and we do everything to support Montenegro moving forward. And as again I said, that the major stumbling point now is the elections of the 4 outstanding judges on the Constitutional Court. That is of paramount importance, and that's what we need to focus on today.
Mm-hmm. So the presidential elections, on the other hand, are scheduled for March 19th. Considering the constitutional power of the president, but also the fact that he is elected directly, how much can these elections affect the resolution of the current political crisis?
That's also a question that I wish not to comment on. It's not really my role, nor of any EU representative. Again, it is about how Montenegro comes together and organizes themselves to come out of political stalemate, a period of instability, and to come back on track on the EU path.
So there are speculation that these elections, presidential elections, could also be obstructed. More precisely, the Europe Now movement in Montenegro announced the so-called Shavnik scenario, that is the breaking of ballot boxes if the State Election Commission rejects the candidacy of their candidate Milojko Spajić, which happened. Now they have other candidate. How does Brussels view the possibility of new institutional crisis in this way?
We don't wish to speculate or comment. We want to look forward. As I said, again, Montenegro needs to come forward. And today, when we record this interview, is an extremely important day for Montenegro's political future.
Serbia openly and continuously interferes in the internal affairs of neighboring countries, especially in the election processes that took place in the previous 2 years. I can just mention as an example battle for Nikšić, for Budva, and the entity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Republic of Srpska. High-ranking officials of President of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, were arrested twice, and with them they had a large amount of money, so they can bribe voters and influence the electoral process. And finally, we have now in Montenegro a presidential candidate, a person who was in 2016 accused for attempting a coup and was sentenced to 5 years of prison in the first instance verdict. And today he is a candidate for president. Why is the European Union silent to such phenomena?
The role of the European Union is to encourage and support Montenegro in pursuing the choice, the strategic choice that Montenegro has made to become a member of the European Union. This is what we focus on. This is what we do in political advocacy and also in support to Montenegro and its reform processes. We focus on that goal, and it is not up to me as an ambassador to Montenegro to comment on those on the type of detail matters that you mention. I of course wish to refer to the EU Council conclusions by foreign ministers recently that again encourages and invites candidate countries and countries in the Western Balkans to cooperate fairly and to integrate regionally, since this will make the accession process towards the European Union smoother for everyone.
Since we are nearly near the end of this interview, so human rights are constantly being violated in Montenegro. And when I say this, I mean also freedom of speech. In this sense, Montenegro has drastically regressed since 2020. How do you comment on that?
I think, unfortunately, it's a global trend that authoritarianism is gaining ground and that democracy is sliding back. Today, a majority of people in the world live under authoritarian rule rather than democratic rule. And the positive trend that we saw in the 70s has been interrupted. And this is a serious threat to democratic principles and democratic governance everywhere. Of course, Russia's war against Ukraine is the biggest crisis for the rules-based international order, also from this perspective. what we are standing for, the European Union and its member states, is democracy, the rule of law and human rights, where freedom of expression is paramount. We think that all societies stand to gain from freedom of expression, which comprises, of course, access to free media that is impartial and factual, and for citizens to be able to form their opinions based not on disinformation and misinformation and propaganda, but of proper reporting. So this is a core interest for the European Union. It is one of the priorities of the Swedish presidency of the European Union as well, because it is a part of the EU fundamentals. In various ways, we encourage freedom of speech, and we try to do our best to counter disinformation and propaganda when we see it occur.
So when I ask you this, it's connected to the last question I have for you today. It's this freedom of speech and also the freedom of, let me say, being a journalist, because journalists in Montenegro since 2020 are on a huge attack from current government. Is there any mechanism in Europe to help the journalists and the media in Montenegro? And even the whole country in the region?
You will have to ask the EU delegation specifically if there are any programs to that effect. I can only say that threats and harassment for journalists, be it online or offline, is a human rights violation. So it's very important that we have partial bipartisan reporting that does not take sides, but that lets citizens consume media and being able to form their own opinions. That is the backbone of democracy. It's democracy's oxygen.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you very much for taking your time for this interview and again for hosting us here in your residency.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you again. Pratili ste još jedno izdanje emisije Znam da znaš. Moje ime je Bojana Dabović, a moja današnja sagovornica bila je ambasadorka Kraljevine Švedske Annika Ben David. Hvala vam na pažnji i vidimo se u nekom narednom terminu.